Chuck Norris isn't just another actor. He's in a total league of his own when it comes to memes. We all know he can squeeze orange juice out of a lemon and beat a brick wall in a tennis match. It'd also be great if his movies could lose $5 million on a $10 million budget and somehow still be called a massive financial success. But that's where the story gets a bit more complicated. Today, let's look back at a world karate champion who unexpectedly turned into a screen icon. How did Chuck actually make Bruce Lee break a sweat? Which studio did he practically wipe off the map? How did he inspire Keanu Reeves? And which of his movies started it all? Check out this legendary piece of Tinseltown history. While Carlos Norris's rise resembles Seagal's, the truth is that Chuck was the instructor while Steven was merely a student. Essentially, take Seagal's reputation and scale it up tenfold. Carlos became Chuck while he was still serving in the United States Air Force. According to him, military service was just way too easy and a bit of a snooze. That's exactly why he got into martial arts, and not just one style, but all of them. He went all in on judo, tang sudo, and karate. He eventually became a karate world champion. Later, he went even further and invented two unique martial arts styles of his own. Naturally, the other masters couldn't ignore a talent like that. That included Bruce Lee, who wasn't afraid to spar with Chuck back in the 1960s. Later, Norris claimed that before they met, Lee didn't really use kicks above the waist. But against Chuck, apparently there was just no other way for him to survive. Bruce had to adapt fast just to stay alive. By the early 1970s, Norris already ran his own karate school. Thanks to that, he met another actor, Steve McQueen. At the time, Hollywood was completely obsessed with Eastern martial arts, and McQueen didn't want to miss out on the trend. Knowing him landed Chuck his first big break in Way of the Dragon. They didn't pair him up against just anybody. They put him right next to his old buddy, Bruce Lee. Bruce had to immediately fight for his life all over again, this time on camera. On a tiny $130,000 budget, the movie cleared over $130 million. That massive success instantly launched Bruce Lee's career into the stratosphere. A slice of that fame went to Chuck too, who played the film's villain. He played a villain again in the Hong Kong movie Yellow-Faced Tiger, but that film didn't have the same luck and totally tanked at the box office. The critics hated everything about it, including Norris. The same fate was waiting for his next film, Breaker Breaker, which hit theaters in 1977. Acting was never really Chuck's main priority. It was more like a side hustle. Because of that, he could afford to stop filming for years to focus on teaching. Maybe it would have stayed that way if Good Guys Wear Black hadn't happened. This is the exact movie Chuck calls the major turning point in his career. Agreeing to star in that film meant he was officially choosing a Hollywood career over a life in professional sports. See, in the late 1970s, Chuck and Benny Orritz were building a new kickboxing league. Saying yes to the movie basically scrapped all those plans. In Good Guys Wear Black, Chuck finally took the lead, and it killed at the box office. On a $1 million budget, it earned about $20 million. It's hard to say what would have happened next, but Keanu Reeves stepped in. Back then, Reeves was close with director Paul Aaron, who had been his stepfather. Even after Aaron and Keanu's mother divorced, they stayed friends and often watched action movies together, including Way of the Dragon with Bruce Lee and Chuck. Some people even claim it was Reeves who convinced his former stepdad to shoot a similar project with Chuck in the lead role. Aaron was mostly a Broadway director with zero interest in filming people punching each other, but Reeves talked him into giving it a shot. That's how Norris landed roles in Aaron's A Force of One and The Octagon. Both of those movies once again cleared about $20 million at the box office. Seeing those numbers, Hollywood's heavy hitters started calling him a natural talent. Soon, Chuck's salary reached $500,000 per role. Next time, producers weren't scared to throw real money at a Chuck project. An Eye for an Eye had a decent $4 million budget and made $12 million worldwide. While it wasn't a total disaster, the brass expected a much bigger payday, specifically hitting that $20 million milestone. Given how critics and fans praised An Eye for an Eye, the film's merit certainly wasn't the problem. Insiders suggest the earnings took a hit because of weak distribution and stiff competition from An American Werewolf in London, which hit theaters right around then. That rival film quickly pulled in $30 million and became a legend, casting a shadow over Chuck's movie. If his first outing felt like a letdown, Force Vengeance was an absolute catastrophe. Around the start of the 1980s, Chuck realized he needed a new game plan. He likely considered reversing the Earth's rotation, but out of sheer modesty, he chose a more grounded path. For his next project, he picked something totally unusual. It was the sci-fi horror film called Silent Rage. The universe didn't exactly grant him a miracle, but it did provide a small win. Bringing in $10 million on a $5 million budget, the film did okay, as our seasoned viewers surely know. With numbers like that, you're barely clearing enough to buy a few candy bars. The critics' scores were a nicer surprise though, leading to his most iconic role. A few people actually liked it when it first came out. The producers of Lone Wolf McQuade had always dreamed of reuniting Chuck Norris and Bruce Lee on screen. Except in this movie, the fight was supposed to be fair, and Bruce was clearly going to lose. To celebrate the occasion, the filmmakers even came up with a hype slogan, the rematch of the century. It's anyone's guess if Lee would have ever signed on to a project like that had he survived into the early 80s, or what his trajectory might have looked like. Bruce managed to go out undefeated, so the filmmakers brought in David Carradine instead. Norris later talked about working with him in several interviews. When pressed about Carradine's combat skills, Chuck delivered a classic burn. He remarked that David was every bit as gifted at fighting as Norris himself was at acting. Yeah, the actor clearly had a strong sense of humour, which shows even more as his career played out over the following years. Carradine likely sensed that looming excellence as well, yet he still tried to assert dominance during production. Word is that their final cinematic clash actually devolved into a genuine fistfight. At least, that is how the witnesses recall the event. David allegedly landed a few solid hits on Norris, who barely even blinked but politely asked him to stop. Carradine didn't listen, but Chuck just calmly ignored him. With legal clauses shielding Carradine from a standard knockout, Norris deleted the threat with a grenade and resumed his schedule, specifically tallying the end of time 2 times and dominating handless fitness trials. People usually point to McQuade as the blueprint for that famous television show that popped up down the road. During 1983, the movie's theatrical performance was fairly weak. It spent $5 million and returned roughly $12 million. Under other circumstances, that might be a win, but this was the most cash Chuck had ever gambled on a single project. Sharp-eyed fans likely caught the trend already. Every one of Norris's latest projects had either tanked or earned peanuts. Because of this, independent studios started avoiding any script with Chuck's name attached. Eventually, Chuck inked a deal with the Cannon Group, and things played out exactly as you would expect for a guy who can solve a Rubik's Cube by just staring at it. Cannon went bankrupt too, which is a name that definitely rings a bell for anyone who grew up on those classic low-budget brawling movies. That studio was responsible for half the action gems of that era, pumping out cheap thrillers specifically designed to dominate the local video rental shop. Take the American Ninja films, for instance, or how that one Belgian action star got his big break thanks to their shoestring production budgets. That gave Van Damme the leverage to jump into the big leagues, and early on, the partnership between Cannon and Norris looked like a goldmine. The agreement called for 5 separate films, with Chuck pocketing a cool $1 million for every single appearance. Their inaugural project, Missing Action, turned into an absolute sensation, immortalizing the image of Chuck surfacing from the waves with a massive gun. Operating on a shoestring $2 million budget, the movie completely crushed expectations by generating over $22 million at theaters. It ended up being the absolute peak of his financial success, a high-water mark that his later films never quite managed to reach again. Seeing the dollar signs, Orion Pictures, the studio behind heavy hitters like The Terminator and RoboCop, decided they wanted a piece of the action. Strictly speaking, his contract with Cannon should have kept him from looking elsewhere, since they essentially owned his schedule. Then again, they once tried to carve his face into a mountain, but the rock itself was way too soft to handle the majesty of his beard. Just like that granite, a little bit of legal paperwork wasn't going to stop the man from doing exactly what he wanted to do. Cannon eventually caved and let him lead the Orion film Code of Silence, a movie originally written with Clint Eastwood's Dirty Harry in mind. Clint was way too deep into directing Pale Rider at the time to bother with some low-level acting gig for another studio. The script got a major facelift to fit Chuck's style, and it turned out to be his final big theatrical win, earning $20 million on a $7 million budget. Chuck actually considers that one his personal favourite, though he did the honourable thing and went back to finish out his remaining Cannon films. There are those who claim that his subsequent movies were the main reason that the entire studio eventually went belly up. Cannon went all in on him, throwing $12 million at Invasion USA, only to see it crawl to a disappointing $17 million. The second installment underperformed, pulling in less than $10 million total. Common sense suggested the third flick should have been produced on a shoestring, yet some executive decided to gamble $9 million on it, only to see it crash with a $6 million haul. Movies like The Delta Force and Firewalker cost a fortune by their standards, but they both ended up being massive financial disasters. Stallone played his part in the downfall as well, starring in the studio's priciest project ever, the arm wrestling drama Over the Top. Crushed by their own ego and terrible spending habits, the studio began to crumble during the late 80s, though they never actually changed their failing strategy. Everything spiraled into a chaotic mess of litigation before the company was eventually dismantled. By the 1990s, the studio was finished, leading MGM to snatch up its assets. Following a wave of failures, Norris finally broke free from his sinking contract to lead the film's sidekicks. After a long dry spell, Chuck finally broke free and produced Sidekicks, a passion project he funded by hitting up wealthy investors in Texas. Those investors probably didn't see much of a return, considering the film only made $7 million on an $8 million investment. 1992 marked a major shift when CBS offered Chuck a seat at the table. He accepted the deal, pivoting to dominate the small screen as the iconic Walker Texas Ranger. That show was basically a parting gift from Cannon, who had been trying to get the project off the ground before they went under. Believe it or not, Walker wasn't some massive ratings monster when it started, usually pulling in around 14 million viewers per week. In today's landscape, those numbers would be a godsend, but in the pre-streaming world, that was just a solid middle-of-the-road performance. To put things in perspective, The X-Files drew 20 million fans, whereas Friends easily doubled that figure. Even Martial Law faced the axe despite pulling 11 million viewers, a massive number by today's standards. Even so, the show found its rhythm and became a massive cult hit, staying on the air for 8 seasons and nearly a decade. It even spawned a short-lived spin-off called Sons of Thunder, though that one vanished almost as quickly as it arrived. A 2005 follow-up movie left fans hanging with a cliffhanger that remains unresolved today. Nevertheless, the brand's strength led to a 2021 reboot starring Jared Padalecki. The premiere smashed recent network records, and the new series managed a solid 4-season run. However, while the Walker brand stayed relevant, Chuck's career outside of that world began to stumble. Top Dog flopped, failing to ride the coattails of similar cop and dog blockbusters. The production ended up losing money, earning just $5 million against a $6 million budget. After that string of bad luck, the big Hollywood money dried up, and nobody was willing to gamble on a Norris action flick anymore. But everything changed in 2005 when the internet started making jokes about his legendary toughness, turning him into a global meme sensation. People already knew he was a tough guy, but that second wave of internet fame in the mid-2000s turned him into a living myth. That sudden resurgence in popularity is exactly why Stallone recruited him for the high-octane sequel, The Expendables 2, in 2012. Sly even let Chuck include one of those famous internet facts in the movie, though he let his wife choose which one made the cut. The rumor about the King Cobra was the highlight, and the film became the most expensive production Chuck had ever been a part of. Outside of a brief walk-on in the comedy Dodgeball, he largely dropped off the map. Over the course of the 2010s and 2020s, he only surfaced for the occasional indie project, commercial, or voice acting gig. Norris kept himself occupied by penning popular books and focusing on philanthropy while living out his golden years. Apparently death finally came for him, but we still need a volunteer brave enough to inform him. Since the legendary feud between Steven Seagal and Van Damme resulted in a win for the Belgian, as we detailed previously, perhaps he is the only messenger tough enough to handle the job. He stands a decent chance of walking away from that conversation in one piece. Watch our featured video on him. Thanks for being here. Hit like, subscribe, and catch you in the next one.